frankly, what they believe is that they should be able to do what they want, whenever they want, never be judged badly for that behavior when they step out of line and hurt people, and not face consequences. That's what they believe.
Lying never feels good, no matter who's lying to you. And the fact is, it's one of those patterns we all often engage in. We tell white lies. We lie to give a reason for why we're late, or why we may not come to work on a certain day, or why we're canceling dinner plans. Any of those kinds of sorts of white lie situations, or even when we tell somebody they look good in that dress. They're all white lies, and they're often meant to sort of save face, maybe not hurt someone's feelings. And as long as they're not situations where you're perpetrating a fraud or really deceiving someone, and it's not a habit, I think we build in some margin for error there. That's not the kind of lying, though, we're talking about here. People who are narcissistic are often very, very deceitful and very prone to lying. Once again, it lines up with their tendency to need to protect their insecurity and their fragile ego and their fragile self-esteem. So they'll lie to prop themselves up. They'll lie to look better. They'll lie to be able to engage in denial and to protect themselves from guilt and shame. So lying serves lots and lots of functions for a narcissistic person. But if you're on the receiving end of those lies, and especially if they are patterned and habitual, it can really, really take a toll on you. Obviously on the relationship, because it's so characterized by mistrust. And that kind of mistrust, if you're experiencing it, can start to extend to other relationships in your life. If one person lies to you a lot, it becomes difficult to start trusting anybody. So this can get really complicated if you grow up with a parent who lies to you a lot. They can lie to you about big stuff, small stuff, but when a parent lies to you, it can really be devastating because that's often your sort of true north. It's where you get your moral core. So if parents are lying, it can really, really make the world like it's really built on really unstable soil. The narcissist's tendency to lie often lines up with other qualities, like, for example, their lack of empathy. They don't stop to think that lying to someone can really hurt them in a very fundamental way. Since they're not connected to your emotional world, they really only look at the function that the lying has for them themselves, rather than the hurt it could cause someone else. They'll lie because of their entitlement, almost like they feel like they can lie. They don't have to tell the truth. Why should they have to? Because they do think they're sort of special and deserve special treatment. Sometimes the lying gets them that special treatment. They lie quite a bit because they engage in denial. It's really, really hard for them to sort of accept certain truths in their lives. So they will just lie to almost protect themselves from that. And they'll sometimes even lie as a way of just sort of denying their own histories. They'll make up sort of half-truths about where they come from, what they're about. And in fact, when we get into full-blown psychopathy or really, really severe malignant narcissism, lying is part of the whole game. That's why they're often successful as con men. They'll make up aliases. They'll tell stories about their histories that aren't true to get access, to get privilege, to get things that they don't deserve. They'll even lie about having gone to college to get a job. So it really depends on how malignant the narcissism is, or whether we veered into psychopathy to really get to how bad this lying can be. The lying can even culminate in things like legal issues. And while lying per se is not against the law, if you lie under oath or you lie about business matters or contracts, yeah, you run afoul of the law. And that's often a place where narcissists find themselves. But in an interpersonal relationship, it may not even be the big ticket stuff. It's the day after day, lying about where they've been, lying about how they're spending money, lying about other things like, are they looking for a job, or, lying about something that they're going to do in the future with you. They make false promises, which can also feel like a lie. And those day after day lies can really erode you in a relationship and fill you with anxiety, self-doubt, and just plain interpersonal exhaustion. So being in a relationship with a narcissist almost inevitably results in pretty consistent lying and hearing lies on a day in and day out basis. In the workplace, it's also really rough because there can be lies about where a job is going, bonuses, salaries, promises may be made, and they may even say, hey, let's just shake on that. We don't need a contract. and then they lie about that too. So the consequences can be quite devastating in those situations. So lying is one of those things that gets built in. And in fact, for many people, it's the lying that often tells them that there's something not right in this relationship I'm having with this person, and is often one of the first red flags that they notice that somebody may have the patterns of narcissism. So pay attention to that pattern. Not every liar is a narcissist. People lie for a variety of reasons. You'll often see sometimes teenagers lie, and it's that sort of lying is often a pattern in adolescence. It's that if it becomes pathological, problematic, or is causing problems for the teen themselves or in the future, that we might pay more attention to it, especially if it culminates into adulthood. So lying, it hurts people when it happens enough. And it's a really bad habit to get into. If it's happening in your relationship, pay attention to it. It could be a really important red flag of narcissism. Those of you who are enduring relationships with narcissists know that lying is part of the territory. How do you manage it? Part of it is that you start, sadly, having to really view everything with some suspicion. It may mean very carefully documenting things on your end, not putting too much trust into them. So for example, if they're a liar, you may not want to put your financial wherewithal into their hands. You're going to want to make sure you dot your own I's and cross your own T's and do your homework. It's a really exhausting way to get through life.
So here we go. Am I the asshole for refusing to let my future husband lie about the house he and I purchased during his groom speech? I mean, this person doesn't even have to write more. Probably not. My fiance and I got engaged a few months ago. They're in their 30s. We're getting married soon, and invitations were already sent out. Right now, we're focusing on much smaller details. We've also been busy moving into our new home that we purchased together. 30% of his savings and 70% of mine. I guess that's maybe the amount they paid for the house, or how they divided the down payment. I'm not sure, but she put in more of it. I have to say that saving up for this house took most of my savings and prevented me from enjoying the things I love spending money on. My fiance sat me down yesterday to talk about his groom speech. He talked about a few points, but what made me upset was when he asked if I would be okay if he mentions the house we bought and say that he was the one who bought it. I was a bit taken aback. I asked why, and he said it's just a confidence boost during the speech, and that's it. I said I didn't feel comfortable with the idea because I think that it's unfair not to acknowledge the fact that I'd sacrificed so much to be able to buy the house. I reminded him of how much I contributed, but he said this doesn't change that it's our house, so it shouldn't matter to me if he said he bought it himself or we both did. I refused because then people will always think the house was bought by him, which is something that will never change no matter how hard I try to prove that I contributed 70%. He got mad at me and said that I was really overthinking this whole thing and making a big deal out of it. Gaslighting. We got into an argument and he started yelling, saying it's just one favor he's asking me to do, and yet I'm making this ridiculous small request my hill to die on. Getting a gallon of milk from the store is a favor. Lying, not so much. He's basically sulking, and now he's out and refusing to answer my calls. So basically, he started the silent treatment till I cave in. Am I the asshole for making this my hill to die on? And she provides a little more information and says, my fiance comes from a more humble background, and money has always been a struggle for him and his family. It became obvious how insecure he can be when it comes to money, especially when he compares how much I make versus how much he makes. I've never made him feel as less than, and he never took advantage of me in any way. So his recent request really caught me off guard, to say the least. Wow. First of all, no, you are not the asshole. Bless you. It's, basically he's saying, it's an interesting acknowledgement of this guy's insecurity, right? I'm so insecure, I need to lie about something with absolutely no awareness of how it's affecting her. That's, if ever I saw a vulnerable narcissist play, it's that. I can't let people think I'm not the one who I'm not the one who fully bought this house, let alone the fact that she put in more of the money, because he sort of feels like, oh, I've had this difficult backstory. And so I need to put this out there so I can feel better about myself. Again, that's that vulnerable kinds of stuff. We see those patterns. That's right there. It's really, really concerning, though, because basically he's saying in our sort of first public kind of pronouncements as a long-term committed couple, I'm going to lie to everyone in this room. And in the future, if this woman tries to say, actually, I put in 70%, if anything, people may doubt her or view her through a negative lens, like, oh, why are you bringing this up? Or maybe it's not even true. She's acknowledging she made a lot of sacrifice. So basically she's saying, let's not even bring this up. But in his groom speech, okay, whatever. In his groom speech, he has to get up in front of all these people and in essence, lie to make himself feel better. Tell me that is not almost like literally a definition of what a narcissistic personality is. I'm going to lie to the world about stuff I do so I can feel better about myself. Confidence boost, this person calls it. I'm actually really struck on these Reddit, Am I the Assholes? Because now I've read so many of them. How many of these people, bless their hearts, I think they finally decide to set a boundary. Like this woman is saying, no, you're not going to lie about something this important to a group of people to feel better about yourself. I would say like 75% of the time, these people are running into the silent treatment, which is a form of stonewalling, right? And stonewalling, interesting, is almost is considered sort of like a sub-satellite of gaslighting, because it's what basically a person is sort of denying any opportunity to have a meaningful conversation. I'm not going to talk about it. And that sort of stonewally approach, it's an incredibly unhealthy place to start a long-term committed relationship. So this would concern me even on just sort of how this person conducts himself in terms of equitable stuff throughout the relationship. One thing we know is that narcissistic relationships are notoriously inequitable. She's already put in 70% to his 30%. So it's already inequitable. And then he wants to lie about it. I've actually worked with folks over the years where somebody actually put in almost all of it, and someone else in the relationship is walking around saying, oh, I own half of this, and it's completely untrue. And so it was hard for the person who actually did actually own it or owned all of it or most of it or whatever. They almost felt like, I felt like I was almost being petty when I was explaining to people, oh, that's actually not the case. And it didn't really feel good. But basically, this guy's trying to lie or gaslight the entire audience because there's no coming back from that. And it appears like, can you imagine down the road, you're sitting with people like, yeah, I know I said that on my groom toast, but I didn't really mean it. Actually, she put down 70%. Who does that? Right? So anytime in a relationship, basic like red flag 101, somebody asks you that, hey, back me up on a lie I'm going to tell people so I can feel better about myself, that's beyond red flag. Like that's like, I don't even know what, like that's a red city block. And for this poor woman, I have to say that now she's in it. They've already got this house. My advice to her is that this dude they should probably put this wedding on ice. Or this guy, or if it's long enough away, get some therapy and sort this out. He needs to get it, that he's that insecure. And while I understand he's from a humble background, I know plenty of people from humble backgrounds, present company included, where they don't lie about their money. They're like, okay, this is how much I put in, or I'm glad we bought this house together. Like, how hard is it for this dude to get in front of these people and say, we bought this house together? That sense of security of saying, we're in this together. Why doesn't his confidence boost come from the fact that he's actually marrying somebody who is doing well? It sounds like she has a well-paying job. Like that the confidence boost is coming about lying about a house and not simply reveling in his relationship. I'm sure many of you can resonate with that in the sense of like, why is this narcissistic person so miserable when they actually have they have a nice partner, we have nice kids, we have a nice life, and yet they're so committed to their misery and have to lie and create a false narrative. Again, the narcissistic folks are the best at creating false narratives, but this person needs to create a false narrative to be able to feel good about himself. That kind of shadiness really would put me on edge to say, what kind of other things is she ever going to either be asked to not tell the truth about or will simply not be told the truth about? So when somebody is almost codifying dishonesty as a place to start a relationship, and owning that it comes from a place of insecurity, get thee to a therapist as soon as possible. And like I said, this idea that anytime people on these threads are really laying down the gauntlet and saying, this isn't okay, 9 times out of 10, the toxic people in these stories say they'll just disappear, won't answer their calls, won't respond to their messages. And that, I don't know if it's narcissistic or not, call it what you will. It is one hell of an unhealthy pattern. Girl, own the fact that you made the sacrifice to have your 70% stakeholdership. And the fact is, as a married couple, they're going to own that house 50-50. So she's already out. But he's really, this is a new spin on community property. So you're in a relationship with a narcissistic person and they go to therapy. What happens next? I'd love for you to also drop in the comments. Has that happened? You've been in a relationship with a narcissistic person and they go to therapy. Here's all I have to say about this. Be careful what you ask for. We know that in general, when narcissistic folks go to therapy, the research shows they're more likely to drop out prematurely, or at the moment when a therapist wants them to go deep emotionally, or be accountable, or take responsibility, that's when they try to cut bait. But the fact is, more than a few narcissistic folks go to therapy, especially people who are vulnerable or what are sometimes called covert narcissists, because they're also more likely to have issues like anxiety, depression, the stuff that typically gets folks into therapy. So you're in a relationship with someone who's narcissistic, they go to therapy. I'm sure you were thinking, isn't it good that they're going into therapy? Maybe there is hope. Maybe they will start unpacking their stuff and working on empathy and compassion, and it'll just be better. It's a long shot, especially if the person has moderate to severe narcissistic patterns, but unicorns sometimes happen. But it is a long shot that you're going to see any change that's meaningful to you in a relationship. But there's a bigger issue here. A bigger problem is that if you're in a relationship with somebody narcissistic and they go to therapy, they may quite often play a different kind of game. So let me sort of lay this out as a scenario, as a means of showing it to you. You are in a relationship with a narcissistic person. After much hemming and hawing, they actually end up going to therapy. They go to therapy. They go for a few sessions, more than a few sessions, maybe even a few months. And then they report back and tell you that their therapist said that they're not the problem, but in fact that it's you that's the problem. That they told the therapist about the things that you're doing in the relationship. I don't know, for example, maybe you tried to set a boundary. And then the narcissistic person will come home from therapy and they'll say, you know what? My therapist said that you're being controlling. They may also say that my therapist said that you have to recognize that when I raise my voice, it's my trauma talking, and that at those times you need to be present with me and hug me and love me like my parent didn't. Now, to say that when they come home and say that stuff to you is a mind F is an understatement. Now, if you're not a therapist, which most people aren't, you may even think that the narcissistic person is coming home from therapy and telling the truth. That maybe their therapist does think that you're controlling, or that you are supposed to be their mommy and love them better. And many survivors are already doing that to themselves. But to hear that their therapist may be suggesting that can make things even worse. I can tell you this, in most cases, a therapist is not telling their client that someone setting boundaries is controlling, or that the other person in the relationship should have to endure verbal abuse. Now, sadly, I say most cases because some therapists may not get it right, but in most cases they do. However, therapy is also garbage in, garbage out. If the client is telling us things that are not true, or are exaggerations or are distortions, our position is to believe the client. So if the client is telling the therapist untruths about things that the other person in the relationship is doing, it's quite conceivable that the therapist may not view the other person in the best light. The challenge here is that if the narcissistic person does this, they tell you that their therapist is saying all this stuff and it works. For example, maybe you start becoming looser with your boundaries, or you actually do give them a big hug when they yell at you. I can promise you this, they're going to keep doing it and telling you more therapist nonsense. For any of us in a narcissistic relationship, the key issue is that we recognize that abuse is abuse and that it isn't your responsibility to hug someone when they yell at you or excuse their bad behavior on the basis of their sad backstory. It is an adult's responsibility to get their own house in order and find ways of responding that are not frightening or abusive. So no matter what tidbits your narcissistic partner may come home from therapy with, the key is to recognize that it's not the therapist's role to necessarily weigh in on the behavior you need to change so you can maintain your boundaries as you usually do. So all of that said, because most survivors of narcissistic abuse, whether it's past abuse or abuse that's happening right now in real time, most survivors tend to blame themselves for what's happening in the relationship. They question themselves, they internalize the gaslighting, and they live in self-doubt. And many survivors are also quite grateful when the narcissistic person in their lives goes to therapy, and they want to support it. So when the narcissistic person comes home from therapy with feedback, suggestions, or direction, it can play upon your existing self-blame and confusion. And people in these relationships may find themselves doubting themselves even more, or even wondering if they are actually the problem, since the narcissistic person's therapist, according to the narcissistic person, is saying that they are. You're never going to find out the truth of what their therapist said because therapy is confidential and their therapist isn't going to talk to you. So basically, the narcissistic person can come home and say whatever they want about what their therapist is saying. Here's the deal. If you aren't seeing substantive shifts in the narcissistic person's behavior, more empathy, more accountability, more self-awareness, more compassion, then whatever is happening in that therapy room is happening, but it sure as hell isn't resulting in meaningful change on your side. When I say that, your side, it isn't resulting in meaningful change on what you're seeing. Now, most people aren't therapists, and they believe that when a person comes home from therapy and says that the therapist is giving suggestions, they may not understand that a therapist is not going to make absurd suggestions to someone who is not their client. So I'm here to tell you that does not happen. So if somebody comes home and says, my therapist says you have to be nicer to me, it's probably not what they're saying. Be very wary when a narcissistic person rolls up to you and says, my therapist says you are this, or my therapist says you need to do that. In almost all cases, it's likely a distortion of something the therapist said, and it could be an attempt to weaponize their own therapy, capitalize on your empathy, and manipulate a situation further to their advantage. Listen, the proof is in the behavioral pudding. If you aren't seeing behavioral change, but are instead being told that you're a bad person, I can tell you one thing about their therapy, it ain't working. Somebody actually sent this suggestion in, so I'd like to thank that person. And they cleverly called this whole process, they called it narcissistic telephone, which I thought was actually quite an interesting way to put it. I really welcome the many ideas that people send in. I really enjoy doing the research on them and doing the deeper dives to further explain this. But like I said, next time the narcissistic person who's in therapy, it may not even be a partner, it may be a family member, they roll up to you and says, hey, my therapist said you're a bad person. I'm guessing that's not what they said. And so just take that with a grain of salt and definitely don't receive it as an indictment on you. So let's start with basics. Narcissistic folks definitely tend to lie more than the rest of us. And why do they lie? So they can maintain an image to other people that will continue to get them validation and praise and admiration. None of us are perfect, right? None of us. Not us, not the narcissist, anyone. And sometimes if we do something that makes us not look good and we tell the truth about it, we might look less than perfect, or less perfect. So let's say someone says, why were you late? And the truth is, because I slept in and I laid around in bed and I was fooling around with my phone and I didn't even really want to be here. That's the truth. You're going to say it? Probably not, because it's not a good look. So instead, people might lie and say something like, oh, I'm so sorry. oh, I got stuck in traffic, and part of that's because I got held up because my elderly neighbor needed me to shovel some snow from their front walk. Well, now that sounds a lot better, right? So when we think about lies, and certainly the way narcissistic people lie, they often maintain their own version of reality. And so they will create a narrative through fiction, sort of mixed with fact, to maintain that reality, often of them as being a good person. Now, this pseudo-reality that is designed to maintain their grandiosity and ensure that they keep getting validation and protect their ego, all of that becomes their identity, which then ends up blurring any lines between truth and fiction. The delusion and the lies become real, and any threats to that reality are overpowered and dominated by tactics like manipulation and gaslighting. So that takes us to this question that a lot of you have sent in of whether narcissistic people actually believe their lies. You know what? It may actually be the wrong question for us to be asking. Because the only thing that is stronger than their lies, that may even drive their lies, is their need to maintain a sort of certain reality to the world. For this reason, narcissistic folks they get obsessed with getting the right picture, or living in the right house or apartment, or wearing the right outfit, or having the right labels, or driving the right car. Looking good to them is more important than the reality. Because if they look good, that means that the world looks at them and says, well, their life must be good because it looks good. Because that's how they view the world. That, well, if that looks good, then it must be good. The lies for a narcissist become a way of maintaining that false reality. And once we dig deeper to a psychological level that the narcissist is definitely not connected to because it's so unconscious, it's their fear that their inadequacy, their insecurity, and the shame that would be activated if all of that messy insecurity and inadequacy were to get revealed. The narcissistic person lives in an unnamed, unidentified fear of sort of being found out. They'll hide backstories and tell revisionist stories about their families of origin, their education, their jobs, their lives, their relationship. It's all more lies. Narcissistic people know damn well what is and what is not viewed well in terms of behavior by society. It's interesting, they know it, they just don't follow it. For example, most narcissistic folks know that if they get caught in, unethical behavior or cheating on a spouse or something like that, it's not a good look and that they will be judged badly. So what do? They lie about it. They lie because they want to be able to impulsively do what they want to do, but they don't want to be judged badly for it. This is actually very different from psychopaths who actually, they'll lie, but they don't care if they get caught, and they often really don't care what other people think of them. They may still lie just to sort of smooth out the rough spots, but they actually really don't care. Narcissists care, and that's what drives their lying. Lies themselves are a complicated space. There are white lies that really carry no harm, and white lies are often designed to protect another person. So white lies would be things like, wow, that dress looks great on you, or I can't wait to go to your sister's wedding. Now, on the other hand, are the betrayal lies. Betrayal lies are on the other end of the spectrum and are the lies that hide information that will harm someone else when that information gets out, like misappropriating money, infidelity, lying about a crime, or some sort of significant ethical breach. Narcissistic folks definitely engage in both types of lies. I don't know that they do the white lies to protect other people, but they definitely will engage in the betrayal lies. It's very interesting to catch a narcissistic person in a lie. If you have enough evidence for example, video or photos or some other kind of smoking gun. Even when you have that evidence, the narcissistic person will often not cop to the truth. They will instead blame you for being paranoid or call it a smear campaign or a witch hunt. They will make it about people being jealous of them. But what they will often not do is simply own it and say, I lied. I lied because I wanted to look good and I didn't want to look like the bad person that this behavior is showing me to be. And they will also never say, I lied because I wanted to look good and I'm just sorry that I lied because that lie hurt you. They don't have the empathy to care and they don't have the insight to connect the dots on what the function of the lie is. They really don't. That's how baked it is for them. So the short answer to this question of whether narcissistic people believe their lies, frankly, what they believe is that they should be able to do what they want, whenever they want, never be judged badly for that behavior when they step out of line and hurt people, and not face consequences. That's what they believe. The lies are a way to keep that entitled reality alive. But they understand the rules of society enough. So narcissistic people understand how society works enough. So they know better than to say either of those things out loud. That this idea that they should be able to get away with whatever they want, whenever they want, and not ever have to be accountable. And that the reason that they lie is because they're entitled. It's just not going to do that. It's not something that looks good to other people. And what is it going to do then? It runs the risk of stopping them from getting validation, which is sort of the energy that fuels them. The narcissistic person's lies are just as impulsive as their bad behavior is. They just do it. They lie literally without thinking because all of their investment is in looking good to other people. But because that unconscious process and the need to look good are so key to their identities, they kind of do believe the lies. Why? Because they have to. The narcissistic person's inner world is like a bunch of messy closets that contain lots of secrets, skeletons, and lies, and they don't want anyone to see any of it. The unconscious and the automatic lying that's such a classical part of narcissism means that it's less about their belief about their lies and more about the fact that the lying is just a tactic for how they get through the world. For a narcissistic person, gaining dominance and validation takes precedence over everything, including the truth. That means if you are in a relationship with a narcissistic person, the lying, it kind of goes along with the territory, and you have to get your head around the idea that at some level they have to believe their lies. So they do. And you, or me, or anyone, none of us are going to be the ones to school the narcissists on their lies or teach them to stop lying. I know that many people out there have the fantasy that if I could just show the narcissistic person that I am onto their lies, then we can make a fresh start. Nah, they're just going to be mad that you took off their mask and then rage further, and then take their lies deeper underground. The lies are who they are. Each of the lies, you could almost view it as a sort of like a little mosaic tile that makes up the mask that the narcissistic person wears to be able to continue to live and portray that false reality to the world, as well as their identity that allows them to believe that they look good to the world. So, could have made this a very short video. So narcissists believe their lies? Yes, they do. Because they have to. And what does that mean? It means that they're never going to stop.
Today we're going to take on a pretty interesting question that many people emailed in, which is, do narcissists know that they hurt you? Now, before I answer that question, I always invite you, please hit the bell, hit the subscribe button, join us on this channel. But now I'm going to move on to the bigger question. Do narcissists know that they hurt you? Now, this is a question that I get from so many people. I get it from emails, I get it from clients, I get it in group sessions I do. So what will happen for a person is a narcissistic person hurts them. But what the person who's been hurt wants to know, do they know? Does this narcissistic person know that they hurt me? Now, I guess the first thing I often want to know is like, what is your motivation for wanting to know this, okay? So one of the things that might be driving you is wanting to know, is the narcissist doing this intentionally? Are they actually sitting down with the intention of hurting me? Or, number two, is the narcissist so clueless that they have no idea that they're hurting me? And here's what's interesting. The answer is actually a little of both. In a subset of cases, yeah, they set out to hurt you. And that is often quite punitive. So when you might see a narcissist intentionally setting out to hurt someone is, for example, when they're on the defensive. They might want to lash out at you for some sort of perceived slight, or for your feedback or a critique you gave them, or because you didn't compliment them the right way. At those times, when they feel slighted in some ways, now that can come out either through a passive-aggressive barb or directly, they do set out to hurt you. And more than anything, it is punitive. It's in a way they're trying to make you feel as bad as they just felt a minute ago, but they're not in touch with that. It sort of sets the scales right for them, and it almost gives them that sense of justice that they always feel like they desperately need. It's almost like they feel better now that they've done something to you so that you feel bad because they're already feeling bad. But I gotta tell you, in more cases, narcissists are just really careless. They say what they want, they do what they want, they have very little care, very little regard for how their words or their actions will impact you. I'm going to be telling you, they just don't care. And there are a few ingredients that sort of come together here to help you understand that. First, and always, is their lack of empathy. They just don't take into account the feelings of other people. And they also have very little self-reflective capacity. They don't stop to think about how their behavior or their words might impact somebody else. The second thing to pay attention to is their impulsivity. And they will often use their impulsivity as an excuse. They'll use it as an excuse when they want something, or they want to say something, or they want to do something. They just do it, or they say it. They don't think, they just do or say or take what they want. Now, as you can imagine, their impulsivity can often get them into a bit of trouble, and it can be very painful. Their impulsivity can mean that they say things that are hurtful, they engage in dismissive insults, they may lie, you might see infidelity, physical acting out, including violence, driving very erratically, spending money that they don't have, expressing rage. But as a rule, narcissists act first and ask for apologies later. And sadly, because most people give them absolution, let them off the hook, they keep behaving badly. It's one of the key ways the world enables them. They let them get away with all their impulsivity. Now, the third piece is their entitlement. Remember, they don't believe the rules apply to them, and they're actually very hypocritical. They hold other people's feet to the fire about the rules. They just don't follow the rules themselves. So as a result, what it might mean is that you might make a passing comment that they don't like, and that they feel that when you say that, it's completely unacceptable. But if they make the same error, if they say something that they feel that they know wasn't right, then they'll say, oh, I'm just a human being. Sometimes I make mistakes. Entitlement means no rules for them, but the right for them to do as they want. And that can be angering. Now, fourth is their arrogance and their contempt. Their arrogance that somehow they are above all of the demands of intimacy in a human relationship, and their contempt for the sensitive and the emotional parts of human relationships. What's interesting about narcissists, these, again, they've been called the disagreeable extroverts. They like human relationships to the degree that they're able to get narcissistic supply and validation and the conveniences that other people bring to their life, or the profit or the sex or other things that they want or need. But they really don't like the messy business of having to actually deal with people and their emotional worlds. So now, when we break it down into all these sort of subcomponents of narcissism, you can see how all of this together means that they may not set out to hurt you. They just don't care enough to think about whether their behavior actually will hurt you. And after they do hurt you, they don't really care that they did hurt you. And all of that can really leave you feeling a bit confused. If they didn't mean to hurt you, then maybe it isn't that big a deal. That's something for you to consider. Now, certainly, if you are in a relationship with someone who intentionally sets out to hurt you, that is something that starts careening into more of a sadistic realm, that somebody actually gets off on harming you. It's easier to get your head around the idea that someone intentionally hurting you is a bad thing, and even get your head around the idea that maybe you need to get out of this relationship. And sadly, even when you know that they may be intentionally trying to hurt you, you may still stay in the relationship, and that's a different conversation. But it is a little easier to say, okay, they're intentionally hurting me, this is not okay, I may need to get out. However, because so often in narcissistic relationships, the reason they do hurtful things is really their carelessness and their impulsivity. That is the more likely backstory of their hurtful behavior. Does that change things for you? Does it really matter to you if it is intentional? Listen, give you a stupid example. If someone hand slips, I don't know, they're doing something, and they end up slapping you across the face really hard just because they slipped. Now, obviously, you may interpret it differently if it was an accident, but that slap hurts. And if they keep making that slip and keep slapping you across the face, and it's always accidental, I wonder how long you're going to put up with that, and I wonder how long you're going to be willing to say, yeah, this isn't okay. In relationships, yes, people make mistakes all the time. In our relationships, we say things that could be hurtful and that are hurtful. And in healthy relationships, you catch it. You catch yourself when you do or say those things, and you take responsibility and you apologize genuinely and hope that the other person accepts it. And most importantly, you don't repeat that hurtful behavior. Now, with a person who's narcissistic, even if, and that's a big if, that they catch their behavior, they probably won't. In fact, the only way they may understand that they behaved badly is because you or someone else said something like, oh, I'm sorry, is that a problem? If they don't see it, if they don't identify it themselves, then it is a very low likelihood that they're going to apologize. They're more likely to either A, blame you for their behavior, B, blame someone else or some other situation in their life for their behavior. Oh, I'm working so hard. Defend or rationalize their behavior, or gaslight you and tell you that you are overreacting or being too sensitive. Or, even better yet, they may do a combination of all of these things. So even if you make the courageous step of calling their behavior out as hurtful, not only are they not likely to take responsibility for it, They are also extremely unlikely to apologize for it and completely unlikely to change it. So let's go back to the original question. Do they know they hurt you? Maybe. Sometimes they may see the expression on your face. Their insecure core doesn't want to take responsibility. And because they don't want to view themselves as the person who does hurty things, their more likely response is gaslighting or deflection. Taking responsibility for bad behavior is overwhelming, and it can result in shame for them. Now, so this next part is going to be of little solace to you. I'm going to, on a probability basis, I'm going to tell you now, they probably do know they hurt you. But they don't like how that makes them feel, so they don't own it, and they don't address it. And this is what I mean when I say narcissists rarely change. It doesn't matter if they think they have changed, if it doesn't translate into behavioral change. Then no, they didn't. If someone's like, no, I see that I do these things that hurt you, but then they keep doing them, that's not changing. And because of their deeply ingrained lack of empathy and entitlement and arrogance and contempt and impulsivity, the odds of change in them are pretty close to zero. So, you may wonder what would happen if you explain to them very clearly that they hurt you, or they hurt, or that maybe even that someone else explains to them that they hurt you. They just don't care. And as I said, plan on a gaslight, deflection, rationalization, invalidation response from them. So, in that way, you just get more hurt on top of the original hurt. When it comes down to brass tacks, yeah, they might know they hurt you. Yeah, they may see the hurt in your face, but they will almost never take responsibility. They may, as narcissists do, issue an empty apology, but even that may not be very likely. And I can promise you this, they are very unlikely to change that behavior, so you can plan on it happening again. And what's painful is that means you're forever on this carousel with narcissists, carelessly or intentionally hurting you over and over again. So whether they know they hurt you or not, it's not going to stop. And based on that, it really is on your shoulders. It's your responsibility to make the choice that is best for you. Doesn't matter if they know they hurt you or not, if they keep doing it. It's a bit of a philosophical question. And some people say, well, if they didn't mean to hurt me, then is it that bad? So the question I really am going to put to you then is, maybe they didn't mean to hurt you, but once they find out they hurt you, they don't care they hurt you. What are you going to do with that? It's often difficult to infer other people's motivations. And especially in the case of narcissism, they're often not very transparent about their intentions and motivations because they themselves aren't actually in touch with them. They're very willing to make assumptions about other people's motivations and assume oftentimes you are insulting them, letting them down, making fun of them, or whatever. But it's always a risky game we play when we do it. So whether or not they intended to or not probably matters less than the fact that they did, and that after they do, their unwillingness to care about it or take responsibility, that's the point that you need to think about it from. 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 You need to think about it.